Right, we did have to get a certain order.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to follow the same format that we have been using up to this point, where you'll each have an opportunity to introduce yourselves. In this case, we've got a couple of more questions that we're going to work through with each of you. I'm going to separate the appeals court and the superior court. We'll separate those two, and then you'll have an opportunity for closing remarks. 2 minutes for each opportunity. And we've got a sign here that'll help you know when you get started, when you've got a minute left, and then when we get down to the end, if you would just wrap up whatever sentence you're on. That would be great. So we're going to start with the Court of Appeals. Mr. Jackson.
Good evening.
Welcome, and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. I'm Judge Darren Jackson. Excuse my voice. I've been struggling with it for about 4 or 5 days now. Court of Appeals is a statewide race, and so I've been driving all over the state talking to voters. I'm originally from eastern Wake County. I live in a town called Knightdale, just east of Raleigh. Born and raised there. Went to undergraduate at Carolina. Went to law school at Duke University School of Law. Returned home, practiced law for 25 years until being appointed to this seat on the Court of Appeals in December of 2020. I'm on the ballot in November for a 8-year term. It's seat 11. There are 4 seats for the Court of Appeals that are up for election this year, and I'm running in seat 11. I'm married, my wife Tina. We have 3 children and 1 grandchild. And I know I'm not contagious because my granddaughter was crawling all over me all weekend, and she didn't get it. So you know how kids are. If they're around it, they get it. I'm here tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions. As judges, we are often limited on what we can talk about the hot button issues and things of that nature, but I'm certainly welcome to answer any questions I can from anybody.
Well, this first question should sound familiar. How will you work to ensure equality for people of all backgrounds in your courtroom?
So our courtroom is a lot different than a lot of the other courts you're going to hear about tonight, in that almost everybody, if not everybody, has an attorney in front of the Court of Appeals, at least the ones that come to court in the courtroom and have oral argument. Only about 1 out of 12 cases actually gets oral argument. The rest are done by briefs, so I do get pro se briefs and things of that nature. We just make sure everybody's treated fairly. My job is not only to treat people fairly, but to make sure justice is done uniformly across the state, to make sure that a defendant in Rockingham County is treated the same way as they are treated in Dare County. A lot of times that means if they don't have attorneys, then that means a little more extra work for me and my staff. That means we dive into it just to make sure that every lead is exhausted, every possibility is run down to make sure they did in fact receive a fair trial. We do not retry cases at the Court of Appeals. We make sure that the law was applied uniformly. I don't decide the facts. That's what juries do. That's what trial judges do when they hear cases without juries. It's not my job to then reweigh that, because I wasn't in court. I didn't get to see the witnesses. I didn't get to see their credibility. My job is to make sure that the law is applied as it's laid down by our legislature and by our North Carolina Supreme Court. I often tell my trial judge colleagues that decisions that they have to make about admissibility of evidence and things, they get 30 seconds to do. I get 30 days. I get more than 30 days. I get as long as I need to make the decision. We try to do it in a transparent, pretty timely fashion. But it doesn't mean that something was done on purpose or intentionally wrong down below. But if they got it wrong, then we want to send it back to get it right the second time around.
Thank you. If you would, please explain your judicial philosophy and how that would shape your actions on the bench?
My judicial philosophy is pretty simple. I just make sure everybody gets a fair and equal opportunity to be heard. My opinion about a judge is that I shouldn't care about who wins or who loses, whether you're found guilty or not guilty. That's not my job. If I care, then I should take a recusal in that case. And the Court of Appeals is a little bit different than a lot of our other courts, and there's 15 judges on the Court of Appeals, but only 3 sit on a case, a panel of 3. And so it's really simple. If I feel like that's an issue that maybe I hold near and dear to my heart, or it hit home for some reason, it happened in my community, I knew the victim, then I just take a recusal. But judges shouldn't care about who wins and loses. They should be the umpires calling balls and strikes and nothing more. And I try to make sure that people do that. That's what I do in my cases. I don't want anybody to ever be able to predict how Judge Jackson's going to rule unless they're looking at the law and saying he's going to follow the law, because that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you. One final question. What reforms do you support to increase access to justice for all?
Well, we're doing a lot of that. AOC is doing a lot of things to try to get more things online. At the Court of Appeals, we because of COVID, a lot of our oral arguments went online, and so now that we've kind of come back and gone back in person, we're still making that available, so that if there's an attorney who's got a case to be argued and he's in Cherokee County, maybe he doesn't have to bill his client for a drive all the way to Raleigh and to spend the night, and then the next day they can do it from their office. So we're trying to embrace this technology and the things that we learned in COVID and use that and make it easier for people. I always I speak to a lot of groups of lawyers, and lawyers just have an ethical duty to give back to the practice of law and do more pro bono work and try to help out. We have pro bono lists at the Court of Appeals, so that if someone brings an appeal and they represent themselves and they've got an important issue to be addressed, we try to get an attorney to step in and represent them for free, so that we make sure we make the right decision, not based on who had the most money or who could afford a lawyer, but based upon the facts and the law of that case. But we need, our court system needs more resources. They need it at every level. And the COVID backlog is just going to create more and more problems with our trial courts. They weren't able to do things in the fashion that they needed to be able to do them in the last 2 years, and now people are waiting on that day of court. And every time that they have to continue a case that was a victim or a defendant who had to take off work that day, a law enforcement officer who wasn't on the road patrolling or answering calls that had to be in courtroom. And so we all recognize the inconvenience and the hardship that creates, and we all want to just do more to address it, but it takes resources.
Thank you. And do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to share with us?
Again, my name is Darren Jackson. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I apologize about the voice. It's really hard. People don't really know a lot about our courts, and they don't care about our courts until they have to go one day, and it's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I just want you to know that, that I care about our courts. I really care about justice. I care about the law, and I follow the law. And I think that's what you want from somebody who's on the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court or on the trial court bench. I had a case recently that it concerns a tort action, a civil action that originated in the 1840s. And it's just outdated in my opinion. And I wrote 20 pages about why I thought that tort no longer should be a tort in this state of North Carolina. We're one of the few states that still has it. But in the end, I recognize that Darren Jackson on the Court of Appeals doesn't get to make that decision. That's a decision for our state legislature or our Supreme Court. And so I followed the law, and then I addressed the facts of that case. And I think that's what you want. I'm not afraid to stand up and say when I think something's wrong, but in the end, it's not my job to change the law. It's my job to follow the law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's share a round of applause for this candidate. All right, for our next two candidates, I'm going to go back and forth between the questions, and again, we're going to start with opening remarks. Mr. Morris, we're going to start with you,
Yes.
and then we'll go to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. thank you to the Chamber for hosting this. My name is John Morris, and I am originally from Eastern North Carolina. I was raised by very conservative Christian parents. My father is a pastor. Actually, he's still in the pastoral ministry after retirement. My mother was a nurse, and that was her ministry. I'm the father of two beautiful little girls who I am very, very proud of. I've also been in Rockingham County for over 10 years. I have been in the practice of law. I had my own practice for 6 years in the western part of the county, where I represented clients in both district and superior court. Also had a thriving estate practice where I assisted clients with estate planning and estate administration, as well as tax and business law matters. I am excited to be your Republican candidate for this important position. I'm a lifelong conservative. I'm a man of faith. I love my family and I love my country. And I am thrilled to be the voice of conservatism as well. I recently wrote an article in the North State Journal about the need to restore our constitutional heritage. And of all that has been going on in our world, with these failed policies that have led us into a recession, one thing that I can see as a bright shining star is that we have originalism on the high court, and we see constitutional decisions being made based on the text of the Constitution, and so we see important decisions that have been being made, and I believe we have to go back to our foundations to preserve our constitutional heritage.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Good evening. My name is Ed Wilson, and I've been your Superior Court judge for the last 19 years. I'd like to focus on three things. I'd like to tell you about my qualifications. I'd like to tell you about my service to my community, my state, and my country, and I'd like to tell you about my family. I'm the senior resident Superior Court judge for Rockingham and Caswell County, which means I essentially manage the two courthouses, run for election here, and of course hold court here, but I've held court in over 57 counties. So when you elect a Superior Court judge, you're electing a representative of your county. I've served under 5 different chief justices of all parties, and I've been appointed and sent to all over North Carolina to hear the most difficult cases. Death penalty cases, medical malpractice cases, complex civil litigation cases. I just returned from Yancey County where I heard a 3-judge panel on actual innocence, an actual innocence hearing. I've been elected president of the North Carolina generation of leaders. I've been on all sorts of boards. I'm currently a scoutmaster. I've served on the vestry of my church and senior warden of my church. I've served on the Chamber of Commerce too, by the way. Finally, let me tell you about my family. My family's been in Rockingham County for generations, at least since the 1840s. I've been married for 21 years. This October, my wife Laurie is here. I've got 4 children. My oldest is on an Army ROTC scholarship. My next son, Harry, is here. My 2 daughters, Maria and Ellie, are also here. If you measure me by anything, measure me by my children.
Thank you. Again, we've got questions for both of you. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Wilson. How will you work to ensure equality for people of all backgrounds in your courtroom?
I think the first time I ever thought about becoming a lawyer, I walked to a local movie theater and saw Gregory Peck playing Atticus Finch, standing in front of the jury and saying, in our courtroom, the courts are the great equalizer. He said, that's no dream to me. That is a living, working reality. And we have to have district attorneys like Jason Ramey, officers like the officers we have, judges to hold up that equality, that notion that justice is blind, free from race, free from gender, free from sexuality, free from political influence. Justice has to be blind. And one of the things I was most proud of teaching at West Point is at the end of the semester, the cadets who would come up to me and say, "You know, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson, I have no idea what political party you belong to." And I said, "Well, then now I've done my job. I've taught you the Constitution. It has to be blind."
Thank you. Mr. Morris, how will you work to ensure equality for people of all backgrounds in your courtroom?
Absolutely, great question. This is the basis of our Constitution. The folks that have the constitutional right to have their matter heard. Again, a judge is one that is impartial, they're fair, but it goes deeper than that. We want to go back to our historical roots. We want to go back to what our founding fathers originally intended when they drafted this wonderful document called the Constitution. In my courtroom, I will uphold it. That will be my daily activity. It's not a matter of just hearing a specific case on a constitutional issue. This is what we do that's what a judge does as their job, as their duty. They take that oath. One of my favorite justices is Scalia, and he always reiterated, and this applies both to the federal and the state level, is structure is key. If we do not maintain the structure as set forth in our Constitution, we forego and it chips away at our liberties. The judicial system plays an important role in that to ensure that everyone has their day in court and that the playing field is leveled, procedure, protocol, and all that is adhered to. But it's deeper because we as Americans need to understand and appreciate our heritage and what our founders sacrificed. I will bring that to the bench every day, and I look at what's happening in our culture today, especially with my two children who I love. What world are they going to be in 10 to 20 years down the road? I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to uphold and maintain our Constitution and our laws. And as a judge, that is a high responsibility, and it's something I do not take lightly. Now, of course, being raised as a pastor's son, I've seen my father having a high calling to being a pastor. I view a judgeship the same way. It's a calling, and it's a very high level of responsibility.
Thank you. And I'm going to stay right here for the next question. If you would, please explain your judicial philosophy and how that would shape your actions on the bench.
Yes. So we go back to the original statement. A judge, of course, is impartial, fair, and maintain a level playing field for those parties there. But as I reiterated, I recently wrote an article for the North State Journal that had mentioned, why we need conservative judges to maintain and to promote our constitutional heritage. What I've seen and this is my position is quite simple. You see Republicans and Democrats. However, the judicial philosophies as a whole fall in those two camps. We see more of the liberal activist judges that impose their own views from the bench under the guise of interpretation. And every time that happens, it chips away at our liberties. As I mentioned earlier, Scalia talked about a structure of the Constitution that has to be maintained, the separation of powers. I fall into the camp of the Republican philosophy, or as a whole, in the originalist view, that we have to go back even further, not just from the text of the Constitution and the law in front of a judge, but where does that foundation, where do we go back and look at the foundations? What did our founding fathers and those drafters intend at the time when those laws were drafted? What were the society circumstances at the time? And we have to apply that today. If we don't do that, if a judge does not do that, we lose our identity and our core as a country. I love my country, and I always remember what John Adams once said. He said, "You will never know how much my generation has sacrificed for your freedoms. Make good use of it." And I'm here to say I will be a judge who will uphold that every day and realize and have an appreciation for what our founders sacrificed for our freedoms.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, if you would share your judicial philosophy and how that would shape your actions on the bench.
Like Justice Brandon said, Sorry, Judge Brandon, I just promoted you. The Constitution is the foundation of everything. I understand that. Our case law, we're obligated to uphold the law. We're obligated to uphold the Constitution. So it's the foundation of all that I or any judge does. But let me say this. One of the main things I do as a judge is determine how to sentence people. I mean, that's really one of jurors in Superior Court decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty. It's up to the judge to do the sentence. So that's where you should really think about a judge's philosophy. And I think what guides me most is Micah, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before God. You have these clashing things that are happening in court. You've got a crime that's being committed, and justice has to be done, right? But you have to decide, do they get another chance? So mercy has to be done, maybe. And so mercy has to season justice. And I try to remember those things all the time. I mean, for 19 years, I've made the toughest decisions. I've sentenced someone to death. I've put people in prison for life. I've put people on probation. And I live with those decisions, hoping I made the right decisions. I've sentenced people to prison for a long, long time, and they will never get out. And that's not easy. But one thing that gives me solace is knowing that people are alive right now because the bad guys are in prison, right? There's some girl who's going to wake up in the morning and make it safely to school and not get run over by some drunk driver because me or one of these other judges put that drunk driver in prison.
Thank you. And I'm going to stay right here with you for the next question. What reforms do you support to increase access to justice for all?
Part of our district is in Caswell County, and I was talking to one of the attorneys there last week, and we were talking about counties in eastern North Carolina that simply no longer really have many lawyers. We need more lawyers. We need more lawyers in Rockingham County. We need our schools to be better in Rockingham County, and they're good. All my children have been in the public schools, so lawyers will come to Rockingham County. We had a meeting about 6 months ago, I guess, with the district attorney and with a lot of lawyers and the district court judges about how we were going to get more public defenders coming to Caswell County. It's a challenge. It's a challenge across the board. I know it's a challenge, Sheriff, getting officers to come work for you and paying them enough, but we just have to do a better job, and that's up to the legislature, really, to pay more for court-appointed attorneys, to consider a public defender. So I'm just aware of what an issue it is, but we have moved cases. We've got good lawyers in Rockingham County. We've got a great DA who's moved cases. We've got hard-working judges, but it's an issue, and it's going to take resources.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, the same question to you. What reforms do you support to increase access to justice for all?
Yes. So this is personal. It hits home to me because when I first started practicing law, I represented those that could not afford counsel, and it hits home to me in two ways. One is how the system is not perfect and how there can be improvements as far as providing representation. And the other part of it is it really brought a sense of fulfillment in my career. When I was in law school, I did not foresee going into full-time litigation courtroom work. I have an accounting background, but when I immersed myself in that, it really grew on me, and I started having an appreciation for representing individuals that struggle in that regard. Again, I believe there are many things that the state could do in order to provide those better opportunities for representation. It's a beautiful thing about our system. It's not perfect, but it's just the way our adversarial system is established. So that's a piece that I think needs to be reformed, looked at, and it most certainly gives those individuals their day before a judge.
Thank you. We're at the point now where I'd like to offer you each an opportunity to provide closing remarks. Mr. Boris, we'll start with you.
Yes. Again, thank you for tonight. It's a pleasure to see everyone here. I'm honored to be the Republican candidate for this position as Superior Court Judge. I, again, am a lifelong conservative. I love the Lord. I love my family. I love my country. You know, I'm going to backtrack. One of the biggest things that I can bring, not only do I have over 10 years of experience as an attorney and then practicing lawyer, the past close to 5 years I've served the county as a county attorney, and that has been a very fulfilling job. And I so much enjoy serving you, the citizens, in that role. But also, I'm going to go back to one of the major life lessons I learned when I was in high school. My parents told me, they said, look, son, you're not going to sit here this summer. You're going to find a job or we're going to find one for you. And of course, what happened? All right, the next Sunday, my father in his robe after the sermon brings me back to the back of the sanctuary and says, this is who you're going to work for the summer. So I ended up working in a hog farm that summer. And you talk about hard work. It was an eye-opener for me. But the one thing it taught me to do is that you work hard for every dollar. And we need to instill that in our generation. But I promise you, I will work hard to get your vote. I will work hard when I even become on that bench, even harder when I'm on the bench. I am one person that inspired me to enter public service was our former Congressman Howard Coble. And, you know, I can only look at that. I cannot feel his shoes. I can only hope to stand on his shoulders. And I hope that he's looking down tonight and saying, yeah, there's the lawyer. He would always call me lawyer when I walk in a room. So I'm excited to be your Republican candidate, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
You all are going to hear from a lot of candidates tonight. And I think what you should do is ask yourselves, what have they done? Many of you all have been coaches, and you know as a coach, when the game's on the line, you're going to have some people who, don't put me in, coach. No, it's too close. I don't want to take the winning shot. Don't put me in. And the person who's going to get put in is the person who says, put me in, coach. My whole life I've been saying, put me in. I was 35 years old when 9/11 happened, and Laurie and I were scheduled to be married on October the 13th. And my father had been in the war in the Pacific, World War II. I had 2 uncles at the Battle of the Bulge, and I couldn't sleep. And about a week later, I said to Laurie, I'm going to join the Army. And she said, I know you are. And by October 1st, I had my application in. I was sworn in as an officer in March of 2002, and I've served for the last 20 years. The scoutmaster of our troop retired several years ago. I said, put me in. I became the scoutmaster. Earlier we were talking about drugs. The best thing we can do about drugs is to keep people from ever getting on them in the first place. Four scouts in our troop just graduated from high school, 4 Eagle Scouts, 2 in the Army, and 3 of the 4 going to college, 1 on an ROTC scholarship. Anytime Raleigh is called and said, can you handle a capital case in Iredell County? Can you handle a medical malpractice case in Durham? Can you get into eastern North Carolina where a probation officer who everyone has conflict with has to be tried? Can you go do that? I've said, of course I'll go do that. Whatever you need me to do, I'll go and do it. COVID hit. the district attorney, the judges, we all got together. We barely missed a beat. We walked right through it. I've said, put me in. But don't take my word for it. I've got the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of the Police, the State Highway Patrol, the judges, the district attorney. You all know
Thank you,
people
Mr.
who
Wilson.
work in the court system, and you may not know me, but ask people who work in the court system who are there supporting. Thank you for your support.
And thank you all for your participation.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to our 2022 Candidates Forum hosted by the Eden